All right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It looks like it's all my friends. I don't know where the Alaska mountaineering community is tonight, but you know, Cheryl, who I grew up with in Vernon, is here, and my undergraduate advisor from Texas A&M and my former admin assistant. It's really good to see you all. And so let's get started. This is once we started doing classes from home in Zoom, I discovered that there's a lot of things we do that would be of interest when people are bored at home. So this is my bored at home series on mountaineering. The first week I did Denali. Last week I did Orizaba. Today is Aconcagua, and then next week is Kilimanjaro. So to get started here, Aconcagua is one of the world's greatest mountains. It's nearly 23,000 feet tall. It's the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas. Certainly it's the highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere. It's in the Andes of Western Argentina, and it is the dream of most world-class mountaineers to climb. Getting there from Alaska was as big a challenge as it was climbing the mountain. I flew from Anchorage to Seattle, Seattle to New York, New York to Lima, Peru, Lima to Santiago, and Santiago to Mendoza. And after all of that, all of my bags arrived on time. So it was a real miracle. Mendoza is about a 3-hour drive from the mountain. It's a beautiful, beautiful town, very cosmopolitan, very European. It's famous for its Malbec wine and the fine beef. And let me tell you, this steak that you see there in the picture on the left, that's a 2-pound steak. That was like the petite little lady. And the other thing is they don't like to eat dinner until midnight. So we were tired from traveling, and we went in at 11 p.m. and had the early bird special. In fact, by the time the trip was over, I was so sick of steak that I was like, please, please, let me have a salad. So anyway, day 2, we leave Mendoza and travel to a ski resort known as Los Penitents at 8,500 feet. It's a really eerie place in that it's an abandoned ski resort. They no longer get enough snow in the wintertime. And of course, their winter is our summer. So only one hotel is open, and we all wandered around the abandoned buildings. And it's like one day or the next, they just got up and left the little ski village. And you can see the ski lift and the chairs and all that are there. So this used to be a very highly traveled area. There was a narrow gauge railroad that ran through it and was the way to get over to Chile from Argentina. But then they built one of the longest automobile tunnels through the Andes. Well, I believe it's the longest underground automobile tunnel in the world. And that caused them to have to abandon the railroad. So anyway, the other thing in Los Penitents is this is where we hire mule freighters to carry our equipment up to base camp. Base camp is at 14,000 feet, and they basically put airline baggage tags on your bags and schedule for when they're going to place them on the mules to go up the mountain. If you look over there on that wall to the left, there's pictures of some of the most famous climbers in the world that have been through this very room before. They include Sir Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to climb Everest, Eric Simonson, who discovered Mallory's body on Everest, and even Reinhold Messner. So we felt like we were in pretty awesome company to be following in the footsteps of those guys. So day 3, the climb really begins at the camp park headquarters on the Horcones River. We're now at 9,000 feet. They will not release, well, we're going to spend 3 days getting to base camp, and they will not release the mules with our equipment until day 2. And our mules will pass us with our equipment on it. Those mules are highly motivated to get to base camp because once they get there, they get to have all the equipment unloaded off of them and they're free for a day. So we're in a desert environment. It's very dry. It's pretty warm, okay? And what we're doing right now is mules are coming down the mountain for climbers that have finished their expedition. And so again, we're passing mule after mule. So our first camp is at Confluencia. It's at 11,000 feet. You can see the tents down here. This is the first time I've ever experienced European style camping. The Europeans don't like roughing it the way Americans do. So we have our tents that we sleep in, but these bigger tents are actually dining halls. And we will eat on linen, in china plates, and we have a chef that cooks for us, you know, and it'll be a 4- and 5-part meal. What we're doing is we're slowly working our way up to 14,000 feet so that we can acclimate. That night, and remember this is summertime in Argentina, we had a couple of inches of snow. So we're wondering what this might mean for high up on the mountain. One of the side hikes that we made was to the south face of Aconcagua. Aconcagua is one of the greatest vertical faces in the world. It's nearly 2 vertical miles straight up and down. It is one of the most dangerous climbs in the world. It rivals K2 and Annapurna in danger. One of the things that Argentina requires that you hire a guide to climb these mountains. Unlike the Americans, you know, in the US, if you want to be stupid and climb a mountain when you don't have the skill to do it, you're more than welcome to do it. But in the rest of the world, you have to hire a guide that knows what's going on. Well, anyway, our guide, or one of our guides, had climbed this face twice. And I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but the little red line on the face was his route that he took up. So we're on our way up to Plaza de Mulas, otherwise known as base camp. The views are just spectacular. We're looking out over the Horcones Valley here, and that mountain in the distance is in Chile. And everywhere there's skeletons of mules that have fallen and died. In fact, I started picking up mule shoes, and I've got them hanging in my barn right now. So finally, day 6, we reach base camp at 14,000 feet. There will be hundreds of climbers here. Most of the people in base camp, their only objective is to make it to base camp so that they can say they've been to the base camp of Aconcagua. Anything you could possibly want is for sale in base camp. You know, there's beer, wine, drugs, t-shirts, postcards, internet service. Internet service up there is about $10 a minute. But if you want it, you can get it. If you can imagine the bar scene in Star Wars, that's what base camp on Aconcagua is like. So again, European style mountaineering. We have a mess tent with, you know, china in it, served by a chef. We have 3 sit-down meals a day while we're in base camp. Even more luxurious is we have our own outhouse that is assigned to us. I was a little embarrassed we got assigned the pink outhouse, but you know, it's better than no outhouse at all. One of our members of our expedition was turning 40 while we were in base camp, and so the chef found this out, and that upper right-hand picture of the chef made a birthday cake for him. And more about that guy in a little bit. So we had been given a really good tip to bring gifts of Jim Beam to the muleteers, so that you're basically buying the fact that they're going to be on time when you come down with your mules. So we're presenting this bottle of Jim Beam to the head muleteer, and most of the camp hated us for that because they were celebrating till about 4 in the morning, hollering and shouting and things like that. So when you get to Mendoza, you have to go to a government office to get your climbing permit. And part of the process of getting your climbing permit is you have to go through a health check. So in Confluencia, they did my health check. I have to have it again now at Plaza de Mulas at base camp. And pretty much the health check is just they take your blood pressure and they check your blood oxygen percentage. Well, the guy who was turning 40, I had a great idea. Well, there's a doctor at base camp that does all the checking on this. And she's a young, new doctor. And I told her about how our buddy was turning 40. And I asked if she could give him a pretty extensive health test, including a hernia check and a exam. And she agreed to that. And while he was in getting his complete health check, word spread around camp that this was happening. And so when he came out with just like this dazed look on his face, everybody cheered and hollered. And he knew that he had been had. So, but anyway, we all passed the health test. So that allows us to move on up the mountain. We'll spend 2 days carrying equipment to Camp 1, Camp 2, and Camp 3. The blue line on this picture will be our route to the summit. It'll take us probably another 6 or 7 days from base camp to get to the summit. We're basically climbing the mountain twice. Once to get to our camp, and then 2 to ferry equipment back and forth or up to camps and then eventually back down. So we spent 2 days ferrying equipment to Camp 1, known as Camp Canada, but we continued to sleep at base camp. And this is what's known in mountaineering as climb high and sleep low, because that's helping us acclimate to the high altitude. So day 9, here we are, we're carrying food up to Camp Canada at 16,200 feet. Again, ferrying food up to camp. It's a pretty easy climb. It's a good trail up there. We'll only use our crampons once and our ice axe once, and that'll be on summit day. The rest of it is just hiking with ski poles. One of the things that we realized once we got underway is we really wish there was snow on the mountain, because it's so much easier to climb using your crampons and ice axe. When we're having to climb in the loose scree, you climb up 3 steps and then you slide back 2. And so it's just a lot more work. We had a scare with the weather. We were at Camp Canada, Camp 1, and we could see the high winds on the summit. And when you see snow blowing off the summit like this, that means the winds are probably at about 60 or 70 degrees, which is just too much to climb in. So we had one day we were a little nervous that we weren't going to get to summit, but fortunately the weather turned good. So here we are at Camp Canada. That mountain in the background, in a few days, we'll be looking down at it. So finally, at about 16,000 feet, it's starting to cool off enough to where I feel comfortable. Temperatures during the day are hovering right around 0, which is a great climbing temperature because you can strip down to minimal clothing and not be all bulked up. But then at night, it's not super, super cold. Those of y'all that were here for my Denali presentation, when we summited Denali, it was 60 below 0. And that was not pleasant. But 0 is kind of the ideal temperature. While we were there, we witnessed a rescue in progress. A climber was being flown out. They were suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema. Most likely it's because they climbed too high, too fast, and they didn't acclimate. Aconcagua kills many, many climbers, and most of it is due to pulmonary edema, cerebral. Oops. Hold on just a second. So anyway, we witnessed this high altitude rescue. Aconcagua, although it's a relatively easy mountain to climb, only 1 person in 3 will summit that tries to. And most of this is due to the fact that people go too high, too fast, and they can't cut the altitude. We're going really slow, and so all of us are acclimating really well. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's a guy on the expedition with us who's 80 years old, and he's hanging with the rest of us. And this is our party right here. It's the terrain's getting pretty steep, but not really technical. We didn't feel like we needed to rope up at this point. And now we're at Camp 2, Nido de Condores, or Condor Camp. We have climbed up and cached our equipment, gone back down, and now we've advanced to Camp 2. At Camp 2 is where the Argentinian government keeps these 2 cabins. This is where they store the dead bodies of climbers. They actually have that many in a season that they have to have a place to store them because they only want to send a helicopter up once or twice to reclaim them. If you see that tent behind that first cabin, that's a French team that they didn't know what those cabins were used for. And when we explained to them, you know, those are basically the cabins of the dead, man, they packed up and got out of there. I wanted to go peek in and see if there was anybody in there, but we kind of thought, well, maybe that's not very respectful, so we didn't do it. As you probably know, on Mount Everest, there's tons and tons of trash and left behind equipment. Aconcagua is no different. You can see this trash pile at our camp. You know, there's an old propane tank and a lawn chair and water tanks and things like that. It's a real shame to see that because people will carry it up, but they don't want to carry it down. It's also now become harder because we're at 17,500 feet. It's harder to set things up. It takes longer to do most activities. Here's our guides. Okay, at this altitude, water boils at a much lower temperature than it does at sea level, and so we're eating freeze-dried food, and even in boiling water, it remains crunchy. Our favorite food was emu pate, or emu liver. It was our favorite because it was very high fat, it wasn't crunchy, and it was very high energy. It's funny, when I got off the mountain before I came back to Alaska, I bought a bunch of cans of emu pate. You know, it sure tasted great on the mountain, but it didn't taste so hot back in Alaska. Just a pretty sunset at Camp 2. We're getting ready to move on to Camp 3. We established our cache at Camp 3. It's 19,500 feet. This is known as Cholera Camp. I don't know if there was an incidence of cholera there, but that's just what it's known as. Again, the route is not technically difficult, but a slip could send you tumbling 1,000 feet down below. So I'd like to brag in this picture that I climbed ahead on the snowbank to take a picture of the group down below. And right now they're considering roping up, and they did rope up to make that climb because they were afraid of the fall danger. But yours truly did it unroped. And my wife is hearing that for the first time. So we're at Cholera Camp. The sun's going down and we're bathed in the most beautiful alpenglow you can imagine. It's just a beautiful, beautiful evening. but we figure the weather is going to be good the next day. So we're going to get up at 2 a.m. to start the climb. And the night of a summit attempt, nobody can get any sleep because you're going through the climb over and over and over again in your mind. So even though you're hoping to get some sleep, nobody ever does. So here it is. We got up at 2 a.m. It's now 3 a.m. We've decided to go for the summit. The gentleman there in the yellow jacket, that's the 80-year-old gentleman. He has his own guide assigned to him. But I'm just, boy, I hope when I'm 80, I can climb like he did. So we're going for it. Here the sun has just come up. You can see we still have our headlamps on. This point was significant to me because it was the 20,320 foot elevation point. Okay, that's the altitude of Denali or Mount McKinley. So every step beyond this point is a personal best for me. So whether I make it to the summit or not, it's a personal best. Again, this is that 80-year-old. Okay, he's stopping to take a rest. He's kind of behind all of us, but when we would stop and take a break, he would catch up with us and he wouldn't take a break and he would just keep on going. At this altitude, basically we're taking one step and then take 3 breaths. One step, 3 breaths. So it's very slow going at this point. And the team is basically now broken into the fast climbers and the slow climbers. And so I am very pleased to brag, I was in the fast climber group. And this is our guide, Tino Villanueva. Tino is now a very famous extreme skier, very famous mountaineer. A year or two later, Tino and I would go climb Mount Elbrus in Russia. Mount Elbrus is the tallest mountain in Europe. Anyway, we ended up breaking apart and he got to the summit 15 minutes before me. And when I finally got to the summit, you know, he was giving me grief about being 15 minutes behind him. And I'm like, you're 25 years younger than me at this point, and I'm only 15 minutes behind. So I had to give him a little grief for that. Anyway, it took us about 12 hours from the time we left high camp to get to the summit, and it'll take us about 4 hours to get down. And there's the proof. There's my GPS receiver with the 22,837 foot altitude on it. My great niece, Cheryl, this is Hart's granddaughter. She sent me a Flat Stanley to carry around. And so I took Flat Stanley to the summit of Aconcagua. And my brother was very proud of the fact that his granddaughter had the most exotic Flat Stanley location of anybody in her class. So it was pretty funny. Oh, and I see David Carr just joined us. David Carr was my first big climbing buddy. David, we did Orizaba last week, and I was telling them about how that was yours and mine's first big mountain. And I never guessed that it would lead to Aconcagua.
Yeah, that was a while back, but I think it took us 2 tries. It took me 2 tries, and I guess you've been back many times now.
Yeah, I talked about it last week, but I've done it probably a dozen times now. But anyway, David and I tried climbing Orizaba. Weather, a combination of factors kept us from going. Probably the biggest factor is we didn't know we needed to slow down and acclimate. Anyway, so I made a little note for Eva, who I'm sure wishes she could have been there. And she replied with a little sticky that you see there. So here is another photo of the summit. This is the top of that 2-mile high south face of Aconcagua. I mean, I can't imagine climbing something that steep and being that exposed to avalanches and things like that the whole time. So here's an overview of our route. One of the things that I did in preparation for this is I put together a geographic information system online map. And this was actually a national 4-H project where kids could log on to the online GIS and see our exact position pretty much at 10-minute intervals on the whole trip. And so we had kids, well, we developed a curriculum with this on how you would climb a mountain and the nutrition and the physiological aspects of it. And we had about 1,000 4-Hers from around the country track us. And so this is our route. The C there on the lower part of the map, that's Confluencia. The trail begins at the park headquarters. And then you can see our 4 camps. You can see base camp. And notice the distance between those camps is actually not very much. That's because it's just so hard to do things at that altitude. So we descend down to high camp, and then we spend the night at high camp, and we're going to go all the way back down to base camp in one push. And let me tell you, we really pushed hard because the thought of food at base camp, and I don't know if I mentioned it, everything that you could buy at base camp, food, wine, soda, all of it smelled like mule sweat. So I'm not sure it was worth it to pay a lot of money for a fine wine if it had mule hair in it. So we spend a night at base camp, and then we're going to go all the way back down to Los Penitents in a one push. It's 25 miles, but it's all downhill. One of our expedition members, who was quite wealthy, paid a couple of $1,000s to have a helicopter fly him out of base camp and back to the park headquarters. This guy, Larry from England, okay, he forgot and left his water bottles in the mule packs. And so he was wanting to drink our water. And so we would make him beg for the water as we'd go along. In this particular case, we had him pose for this picture like he was completely out of water. So we finally make it. Interesting thing, we get back to base camp, and it's a big deal. The Park Service there really celebrates if you made it to the summit. And our guides had beer waiting for us at base camp, and we drank a beer. And someone made the comment, "Where is the outhouse?" And one of the park rangers said, "You just climbed Aconcagua. You can pee wherever you want." So I'll just never forget that to this day. Well, we got back down to Mendoza, and there's a special restaurant in Mendoza where all the climbers go. And there's 2 sides to the restaurant. One side is for those climbers who are about to attempt Aconcagua. And that side of the restaurant is pretty quiet because people are worried about what are they going to encounter on the expedition. The other side of the restaurant is for those who have successfully climbed Aconcagua. And on that side, people are hollering and shouting. It was, a really festive activity. And meat and meat and meat. Oh, man. Anyway, the guy here, I put my mouse over this guy. This is the 80-year-old guy in the white shirt. And who's that guy? The world's most interesting man who does the beer commercials. This is that guy. Oh my gosh, even at 80, all of the women in the restaurant were coming up to him and like talking to him and having their picture taken with him. Because even at 80, I mean, he just told stories that were just incredible. So anyway, he was an accountant in Florida. So I made this presentation about 8 years ago, and if you look on here, it's like, well, what are my future climbs? Is it going to be Cotopaxi or Mount Logan in Canada or Kilimanjaro or maybe even Everest? Well, since then, I've done Kilimanjaro. chose not to do Everest and do an alternative to Everest in the Himalayas last year called Stoke Congaree. And we're thinking about Cotopaxi in the next couple of years. I know some climbing friends of mine, we're looking at going to Bolivia next year and climb Alto Tango, which is a 20,000 foot climb there. Well, anyway, I want to do a shout out to my former Scoutmaster, Mr. David Hutchinson. When I was 11 years old, he called me up and he said, Steve, how would you like to join the Boy Scouts? And I said, Mr. Hutchinson, I'm not really interested. And he said, I'll be over at 7 to pick you up. Okay. Well, my first camp out was as an 11-year-old boy at the Quartz Mountains of Oklahoma. Most people would hardly consider those mountains, but they were the biggest thing I'd ever seen, and I have been hooked ever since. And this past December, I got a call from Mr. Hutchinson's daughter. He now lived in Colorado, and Liz said, if you want to see Dad, you better come now. And so I flew to Colorado to see him. And Mr. Hutchinson was now blind, and he didn't know I was coming. But when I came to the door and I said, hello, Mrs. Hutchinson, he immediately perked up. He recognized my voice after all those years. And one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given is the opportunity to say thank you for all the things you taught me, because 95% of the skill set needed to climb a mountain like Aconcagua, I learned as a Boy Scout. The knots and the ropes and the techniques, that's a very small part. Leadership and knowing when to be a follower, how to get along with people, how to anticipate other people's needs, those are the real skill set that you need to conquer big mountains like that. So thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Here's my contact information. If you're thinking about doing Aconcagua and you have questions, you can always email me or call me. It's a great mountain. Like I said, it's if you're trying to make a decision between Denali or Aconcagua, I would do Denali first, so that you think that's how hard Aconcagua is going to be. Aconcagua is probably about half the effort of something like Denali. So that's my presentation. If anybody has a question, I'll be happy to answer it.
Did everyone in your group summit?
Everybody in our group summited, which is very rare. Usually, we were in a group of about 6, so probably only on average 2 would summit. But we all did, and we've all remained friends ever since then. Was that Donna?
That was Cheryl.
Oh, okay. So anyway, David and Cheryl, in September, I'm flying to Colorado, and they're going to have a service for Mr. Hutchinson, and I'm going to spread his ashes on a mountain there.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
Yeah, I
That's
think
awesome.
That is. So what kind of budget are we looking at for these trips? Just ballpark. I mean, I know you haven't been there in years.
I would say this trip, with airfare and hotels and paying for the guide service, it ran about $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that was very expensive when you consider, almost all of your food is included. And we stayed at a really nice hotel in Mendoza. So most of these trips, well, it depends on who you hire as a guide service.
Right.
Generally speaking, you can hire a guide service that's a Cadillac everything. They might charge, $8,000 or $9,000 for this. Or to give you an example, we have to hire a guide for Aconcagua in Bolivia. It's a government requirement. And the cheapest guide I've seen is $300. The most expensive one I've seen is about $4,000. So we'll go with something in the middle. Well, hey, next week is Kilimanjaro, that's a pretty fun mountain. I thought it was relatively easy, but it was really spectacular sight. And depending upon who signs up for that presentation, I may, well, for the ladies that are on here, I may show the, well, it's a tradition of Australian climbers when they get to the top of Kilimanjaro is to pull their pants down and pose nude. So if you can imagine, some of those climbers are pretty buff.
Speaking for this part of the ladies, we're okay with that.
Well, you know, I'll make, when I get back, I'll have, I do a lot of presentations at schools and stuff like this. And I always worry that I've got the adult presentation, like in this one, talking about how we took the Jim Beam up to the, you know, the muleteers. Well, I leave that out with the kids, you know, but I always worry I'm going to get my slides mixed up sometime. Well,
What night is the Kilimanjaro presentation?
it's going to be Wednesday at 6.
Okay, so same time frame. Cool.
Yep.
Is the Denali presentation recorded?
Yes, it is. If you go to the Matanuska Experiment Farm, or I can send you a link, Cheryl.
Okay, I'll send you an email.
Okay, we've got our own YouTube channel, and all of the mountain presentations are on it. And David, you ought to look at the one on Orizaba. I was really glad you weren't there last week, because that way I could lie about everything and not have anyone.
Well, on the YouTube channel, what do you go to?
You look up the Matanuska Experiment Farm, or you can just send me an email and I can send you a link to it.
Okay.
And like I said, the Denali slides are on there. They're pretty interesting. And Denali is the hardest thing I've ever done. And just last week, someone asked me if I would do it again. And I'm like, no. Well, Dave, while you're on, well, both days while you're on there, you'll appreciate this. When I landed on Denali in 2009, we were unloading stuff off of the ski plane. And this 30-year-old guy comes up and starts hugging me and is like, Steve, Steve. And I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Well, it turns out he was one of my Cub Scouts from San Antonio. Who really? Rock climbing, and he was now a mountain guide. And so we decided, I wasn't able to summit in 2009. The weather never did break. But he and his wife and I decided that we would go back in 2010 and climb it. And we summited, and his wife didn't know it at the time, but she was a month pregnant. So their daughter is probably the youngest person to ever summited Denali.
That's good.
Well, I'm going to log off here. And if you want to link to those other presentations, email me, and hopefully I'll see you for the Kilimanjaro presentation.
Thank you, Steve. That was great.
All right.
Thanks very much, Steve. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Was that Melody?
That was Cheryl.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll see y'all later.
Good night, everyone. Stay safe.